Hello and welcome to the Beer, Sweat and Tears podcast, so this is the second part of it, where we'll be talking about the history of coal mining in the Northeast throughout post-war Britain. The history of mining in the Northeast dates back prior to World War II, however it was the decades that followed it that are now most debated as tension between the different economic models of nationalisation and privatisation started to rise, as well as continuous rise and falls of the industry until its eventual collapse with the permanent closure of the Ellington Colliery in 2005. Even though the coal mining is now a thing of the past in the Northeast, we'll be looking at sites today which were previously used for coal mining and could be having a potential modern resurgence in an environmentally friendly way. And also, at the end of this podcast, we'll be answering some research questions, which were, how have Northern Eastern industries progressed since World War II? Second one being, to what extent has globalization transformed the Northeastern identity? And how can podcasts be used to both educate and entertain an audience?
The decline of coal in the Northeast was a steady decline following the end of the Second World War. This period of decline was marked by periods of unemployment and constant industrial disputes, not only in the actual coal mining industry itself, but across all Britain's heavy industries. There were many attempts to combat this and many attempts to appeal to unions, and nationalisation was brought in an attempt to combat unemployment. The sort of height of this industrial disputes was in the 60s and 70s, which the probably most well-known strikes out there were the ones in 1972 and 74. However, in the 1980s, it's seen as the turning point because by then the unions were seen as being too strong following not only the 74 strike, which arguably took down Ted Heath's government, but also because of the winter of discontent, which brought the country to a halt. So wanting to combat unions, which were being seen as too powerful, was an important objective for Margaret Thatcher and her Conservative government. So in order to do this, Thatcher introduced a plan to close 20 pits. And so the National Union of Mine Workers went out on strike in 1984 and 1985, which this represented the final exhaustion of the trajectory of economic development that underpinned the Industrial Revolution in the Northeast, due to a varying degree of factors, such as a decline in markets, an increase in competition from abroad, and just an overall decline in the industry in terms of total number of pits active. The miners were eventually defeated, and so that explains how the 80s are seen as the downfall, because following the 80s, it would just be a slow decline of the number of pits all over the country, including the Northeast, obviously. Now, one of these pits, Ellington Colliery, which holds the distinction of being the last operating mine within the Great Northumberland coalfield, its closure in 2005 marked the end of coal mining in the Northeast, which is an extremely significant event in local history due to just the sheer importance of coal in the region, not only as the main employer, but also just in terms of just symbolism. And Ellington, along with its surrounding towns and villages of Asherton, Linton, Bedlington, Camas, Lynemouth and Blythe, that were all part of what became known as the Great Northumberland coalfield, due to the fact that people in Northumberland had been mining coal for centuries, and naturally the pits themselves became a part of the towns and villages and a part of their identity as a community. So when Margaret Thatcher began to close the mines as a result of the strikers' defeat, many felt that when the pits closed, the towns were left to pretty much destitute, and they were just going to suffer and not get any better, because the main source of income for the people who worked in the towns, and also all just the community aspect of it, was gone because the pit was gone. However, there were some steps to combat this identity crisis, and these were mainly two museums. The first one was Beamish, which was established in 1970 in County Durham, and Woodhorn in 1989, which established in Asherton. These museums were just mining history and the history of like a normal person in the Northeast, And because it was the history of a normal person, people could learn just about what life was like for an ordinary person in the region.
Yeah, so just to build on what Matthew's just said, to really showcase how vital mining was to the Northeast, it's thought that in 1913, the Northeast produced a quarter of Britain's coal, which shows how long mining has been part of the heritage of the Northeast. So that's just to build on what Matthew said before. And he also mentioned the politics around the closure of the mines, which is why the book labeled the Thatcher Revolution is useful, because although the book is not specific to the Northeast and is more about going into detail about politics in Britain, it does include detail about the impact of mines in society, including the years prior to the mining strikes of 1984, 1985, which is what Matthew spoke about. For instance, it states in 1979, Britain had its worst year ever, with 4.5 million workers on strike at one time or another, and almost 30 million workdays lost due to strikes. Therefore, this is useful because it highlights the scale of the tensions in Britain, which has in later years to result in the closure of the mines, which had a major impact on the Northeast. It's thought that Thatcher's strategy was that the excessive costs of increasingly inefficient collieries had to end to improve the economy, as well as trying to limit the voice of the National Union of Mine Workers, which subsequently meant more of a dependency on coal, which was being imported. However, the most notable example of tensions is those mining strikes of 1984 and 85. And looking at an article from the Newcastle Journal from the 27th of May 1985, Scargill calls for those working in the mines to be ready for some further action to save the Northumberland coal industry, which, as Matthew spoke about, didn't happen because of these closures, with the most recent one being Ellington Colliery in 2005. There is a debate about a resurgence of the coal mining industry in a more environmentally friendly way. For example, the article from ITV TNT's just in 2021, it's an article which demonstrates that although the closure of the mines had a major impact on the Northeast, the aftermath of it still has the potential to benefit the people with a more environmentally friendly initiative by using geothermal energy from old collieries, which is obviously important now with contemporary debates about the environment. And there is also a potential reopening of a mine in Cumbria called Woodhouse Colliery. And although there is debate about whether that would be environmentally friendly, they have committed and said that it's thought they will plant 250,000 trees every year and make renewable electricity central to their project.
What I could say was the last stand of coal mining in the Northeast was the Ellington Colliery, which was used as the backdrop of the film Billy Elliot. And although it was shut in 1994 by British Coal, as industry-wide administrative functions were transferred to the Coal Authority, thanks to the Coal Industry Act in 1994, giving British Coal next to no influence, leading to their shutdown in 1997. But the colliery was then acquired by a private company, RGB Mining, for £800 million and reopened in March 1995. Throughout the rest of its lifespan, the colliery ran into nearly continuous problems. Like in 2002, it was threatened by closure as it was generating losses of £26 million in 2001. But thankfully, with an injection of £1 million, it was revived to search for new seams for coal. Despite these efforts to keep it open, it was permanently closed in January 2005 because of its financial loss, however. But not because of its financial loss, it was because it was sadly flooded, as it was very deep underground, so it's inevitable really that it would be flooded. But Ian Levery, the president of the National Union of Mine Workers at the time, thought the water could be completely pumped out and could continue as normal. But despite this optimism, Coal UK, the owner since 2001, it was completely unsafe for workers, signaling no chance for reopening. The 340 miners who worked there at the time were later given £6,000 each after an employment tribunal ruled that UK Coal couldn't give a statutory 90-day consultation notice of closure, ending coal's life in the Northeast 2005. All right, so how does everyone feel about how have Northeastern industries progressed since the end of World War II?
So yeah, I think that is one of the main questions, James, because obviously the closure of the pits did happen. However, there has been a sort of a modern resurgence, linking back to a point I made earlier about potentially using that geothermal energy from old collieries, which is almost a progression of mining itself to make it more using that geothermal energy, and also the potential of Woodhouse Colliery. What do you think, James?
Yeah, obviously the colonies did see a temporary resurgence in 1973, I think, with the coal oil crisis, where obviously there was no other alternative but to use their coal, as you know, Saudi Arabia and any Middle Eastern countries boycotted, embargoes their oil to the Western countries, including Britain. So therefore, the Northeast industries progressed quite a lot in the 70s in terms of coal. Whereas obviously that died down, coal obviously declined quite heavily. And obviously the modern sort of, things obviously see a resurgence as well. So.
I think that when it comes to northeastern industries, yes, the ones that the northeast still probably remains famous for: coal, shipbuilding, dockers, steel manufacturers. They've all declined, but as Joe stated, with the introduction of geothermal power probably potentially being introduced, then, and also there was a factory which is going to be in Northumberland near Blythe, I think it was, which is one of the former pit villages we've mentioned. There was going to be a factory that makes electric car batteries. So even though that coal, shipbuilding, and all these other industries have declined, there is still, the northeast is still a very industrious area, and it's still going. As a matter of fact, it's not just it's entirely declined.
To what extent has globalization transformed the northeastern identity?
Yeah, so again, James, I think that is a question that does link to this whole argument, because in a way, prior to the closures, it's thought that one of the strategies of Thatcher was to try and be more dependent on coal, not just coal, but for this argument, we'll say coal to be imported, which shows that globalization was part of the question. And not only that, that there is an argument that this whole debate wasn't only political. There was also an element of trying to limit the voice of the National Union of Mine Workers. What do you think, James?
Well, I think that globalization obviously has transformed it, mostly, I'd say, perhaps in a negative sort of way, as obviously globalization led to the fall of coal in the first place, as obviously for the guaranteed trade of the empire. Obviously, the empire now less power, more powers to actually get cheaper coal, cheaper resources, and obviously Britain themselves seeking cheaper means and obviously more efficient means of powering their nation. So obviously, coal's led to a downfall because of it.
Yeah, I'd agree. What about yourself, Matthew?
I'd agree with that as well. It's especially when James said that with the markets going away because of Thatcher wanting to get out and sort of integrate the UK into the new global world, with empires going down for export coal, and then with more coming into import, and also because she wanted to take down the unions, it just seems like it's all linked. And so then, because that's all linked, and you look at what shutting the pits has done to some of the communities, it hasn't been that great for them. Because you could also argue that since the pits have shut, they haven't gotten something back to sort of replace the hole in the community that the pits used to have.
All right, so the third question, the third and final one, is how can podcasts be used to both educate and entertain an audience?
Well, hopefully we've entertained people about the history of mining in the northeast, but I think it's unquestionable that they do have the potential to, simply because of the range of platforms that they can reach, and not only, well, specifically for us, if people want to find out any further information, there's an Instagram and Facebook page named Beer, Sweat and Tears. So hopefully people will engage with that as well, because podcasts are great for informing people about issues like mining in the northeast.
Well, I think that they can be instrumental, I think, in educating the audience, as obviously books aren't for everyone. Some people can get easily bored, maybe lots of effort reading. So maybe it's good just to listen to information, so it's more clear for people. And obviously bright personalities like ourselves. Obviously, we can also entertain a great audience, and obviously, as entertaining, we can also make people remember. Obviously, lots of facts and figures.
Yeah, just to expand on what you were saying about maybe people don't have time to sit down and read a book as well. The thing is with podcasts is that because they're on so many platforms, you can just put one on in the background. Maybe if you can find one on Spotify or just any other thing where you don't have to be like constantly watching it, you could do it while like you're on a run or something like that, just for something to listen to. Also, when it comes to podcasts, you can get really like specific topics. So if you would imagine like a massive book that someone would have to go through to find information on one thing that they want to learn about, then if they find a podcast episode on it which is specifically on it, then they've just probably saved themselves a lot of like going through something they didn't want to get what they needed or wanted.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that wraps it all up. So obviously, like and subscribe for this podcast, and obviously you can follow our social media to get, I don't know, more news. But anyway, thanks for listening, and see you in a bit.